Okay, so I am recording and let me share a screen. Oh no. Okay, and so I left off at maternal depression. In the next few, like I'm on page 265. Yeah, I think I gave this term serve and return. It's just really another way, another sort of metaphor for this notion of interactional synchrony. Parents do a lot of back and forth things. Kids really, or I should say, babies really like it. Uh, um, and I think, well, so much emotion learning is happening on the part of the baby based on all of this kind of face-to-face input. And with that in mind, it raised the issue about either, think about either a depressed parent or a parent that's sort of constantly angry, or otherwise kind of emotionally inappropriate, then the baby's just not getting, the kind of feedback that would be ideal for the baby. Um, I thought this was really interesting, the cell phone use. Um, I'm glad to see this making it into a textbook. I think everybody sees this now. With older children, if you go to the park, a common parent activity. I remember doing that for many mornings with each of my children. More and more, you see parents that are kind of addicted to their phones and they can't really pay that much attention to their children. Even at the baby level, that's having a cost for the baby, and that's interesting. So there you go. Just a couple different dependent measures, child engagement, child positive. They say effect. I think they mean affect. In any case, that's fine. Yeah, going down as parents use cell phones more. Um, the book had some nice coverage of, let's see where we are, of cultural influence on infant temperament. Um, in particular, for example, the Asian culture, some Asian cultures just have sort of a more subtle display of emotion. It's not that many years ago, I was doing face emotion research at UNC. Uh, and it was really interesting to look at the cross-cultural research. Um, in the United States, if we make a very, what we call neutral face like this, it's Um, that in the US is interpreted as a little bit negative, like the absence of any affect is a little bit negative to us. Whereas I believe it was Japan, completely neutral face was not seen as negative. So to be really clear, we said the basic emotions are universal, and that seems to be reasonably true. However, there's a cultural influence in how well they're shaped, how much they're expressed in different ways. And that even relates to infants. And then in terms of temperament, the thing I want to really emphasize is goodness of fit. And culture reminds us that babies are um, are learning, very early about kind of expression and it influences their temperament. Okay, that's yeah, we've talked a little bit about that. attachment you might know about already, or you might not. Let me just say a few words. This is the full attachment story is kind of an amazing story, but I won't spend an hour on it, which I could easily do because it's just so interesting and really important. The thing that I would say is that throughout most of the 20th century, children were kind of, lots of children probably had good parents and some children not so much. Um, but we didn't really appreciate the power of the infant parent bond. Interestingly, thinkers after Sigmund Freud, kind of in the thinkers in the Freudian tradition that sort of followed him, paid a lot of attention, began to pay attention to this. And John Bowlby was not himself exactly a Freudian, but he was part of that time and really a profound thinker in his own right. He observed children in hospitals. And so basically, when parents had to bring their child into a hospital for a medical procedure that was going to last, say, a week. So suppose the child had to have an operation and the child was going to be in the hospital for an extended period of time. And remember, back then, a longer hospitalization would have been more common just because of not the same level of like medical care that we have now to get a child in and out with antibiotics and whatever. So the child would come into the hospital and the parent would be advised to go home and not visit the child, to come back when the child was healed in however many weeks. Now, think about that. I don't know if, again, if you have children, no parent, no competent parent would bring their child to the hospital, just say goodbye, I'll see you when you're better, and then not come back until the child was healed. That would be a pretty traumatic experience for a child today. Again, and a competent parent just wouldn't do that. In fact, if you think about like the Ronald McDonald House on Colfax Avenue near Children's Hospital, Ronald McDonald Company built places for parents to stay so that they could afford to have someone like sleeping on a cot next to their kid and then going home and showering or going back and forth. So we go through great effort to sort of be with our children all the time. But mid 20th century, people just didn't appreciate the notion that that would be actually damaging to the child. And in fact, what Bowlby originally noticed was that the child, when the parent returned, the child was very kind of withdrawn and didn't act happy to see the parent. Doctors had interpreted that as, well, that's all the more reason to keep the parent away while the child's getting better. Whereas Bowlby recognized, he began to recognize that that was really a traumatic response. Um, and then he and Mary Ainsworth, who worked with him sort of in the upcoming years, developed this notion that the baby comes into the world evolutionarily prepared to attach to the parent. This attachment happens not right away because infants are too cognitively immature right at birth, but in the months after birth, they become progressively more attached to the parent. And really importantly, the parent is wired to attach to the child immediately. And this makes sense because remember, babies need so much care. If they weren't profoundly attached to their baby, when times are tough, they might just let the baby go and the baby wouldn't survive. Um, I think if we took a historical look at this and we went back hundreds, if not thousands of years, we might get a little more complexity in terms of the nature of attachment. But I will say today that parents have the baby, They look at their baby and they think their baby is the most beautiful thing in the world. Newborn babies are usually not that beautiful. They're kind of funny looking. They become beautiful. But every parent, including me, thinks their own baby is just beautiful and lovable and just amazing. And of course, I think you kind of know this. But what I want to get at is that that attachment bond is reciprocal. It goes in both directions, and it's really important. Um, so yeah, so let me um, John Bowlby, kind of a funny looking guy. Doesn't seem doesn't seem in that picture to be incredibly warm toward the child, but he was really a profound thinker. Okay. He was influenced by the ethologists. I think your book has the classic picture of Conrad Lorenz walking, yes, walking with his ducks who have imprinted on him. So this notion of imprinting for Bowlby, it was just one way of thinking about how this notion of the parent-child connection is built in through evolution. So ducks are certainly very different than mammals, but whenever we see things in non-human animals, it sort of gives us support for this idea that there would be an evolutionary push. Uh, and then comes Harlow's monkeys. This was a super important study. Let me get us to the right page. Um, shoot. Okay, I lost Harlow's monkeys page. But here's the deal. It's important to remember this happened during the behaviorism days. This is one of the many animal experiments that if behaviorists had been honest, they should have been. I mean, that's not a fair way to say it. If they had been able to kind of honestly look at the evidence, they were in some trouble. So he compared the wire monkey that delivered the milk to the cloth monkey that seemed more comforting. And of course, it's very clear in the book. The take-home message is really clear. The milk they drink because they have to, or they have they're hunger or whatever, hungry or whatever. Um, However, it's warmth, nurturance that the stressed monkey is seeking. That's really just like human babies. Human babies want to be hugged, they want to be swaddled, they want to be like they basically want to be loved. And so it is with our non-human. These were monkeys, these were not apes, so these aren't that close to humans, but close enough to make a point. Oh, there we go. There's our monkey. Another really important point that the book points out that comes from Harlow's work is that monkeys that are raised with inappropriate parenting become really damaged parents themselves. So this notion of a damaged attachment system gives rise to damaged parenting. So with humans, we know we have overwhelming evidence that parents who themselves are poorly treated, who are maltreated as children, parents who are neglected and abused as children, are more likely to themselves be abusive or in neglectful parents. Let me say something really clear. They're not likely to be. That's wrong. They're like if you experienced abuse as many people did as a child, you are not likely to abuse your child. You are more likely than you would have been if you hadn't been abused. That's if you have trouble with that, send me an email and I'll explain it. But basically, it's elevated risk. So the point I want to make is that the damaged attachment system, if you're this baby has a very atypical, she's a stressed infant and she's not getting the kind of maternal care that a real monkey mom would have given her or him. Um, that baby will have a compromised attachment system. And later, when that baby becomes a parent, she might be incapable of really basic parenting, which is very profound. Okay, there's Mary Ainsworth. She did. She's one of them. She's really a giant of the 20th century. So the strange situation. I think the important point to the important take-home message is that the strange situation uh, provides a chance for researchers to observe how the baby acts upon separation and then reuniting with parent. So babies get stressed all the time. You're holding your 8-month-old infant. You need to pass it to your friend, pass the child to your friend so you can do something. The baby starts to cry, totally normal. And passing it to your friend is not going to hurt the baby, even if the baby becomes distressed. But the really important measure here was how successful is the mom, and that's how successful is the mom's effort to calm the baby. And this can sound like blaming mom in a way that I don't really mean it. But in a really ideal, securely attached relationship, the infant kind of makes a comeback really quickly or really smoothly. Um, okay. And so securely attached children do better, look look better in this paradigm is the best way to put it. Um, and then there were a couple categories of insecurely avoided, what she called insecure attachment. So insecure avoidant, insecure resistant. I myself have not been super compelled by the differentiation of poor attachments. So I'm kind of have small validity questions about it. But here's what I do believe. Good at the sort of healthy attachment, the secure attachment versus insecure distinction, I think is very real. As we begin to parse up insecure into different kinds of insecure, um, uh, I wouldn't say that I don't believe it. I would say that it becomes more noisy. In other words, um, breaking them down into just two might be a little bit simplistic. That being said, the disorganized attachment really came of interest of people who were studying maltreatment with the idea that neglected or otherwise maltreated children were more likely to have this disorganized behavioral presentation, which makes kind of a theoretically sensible story. Um, however, um, well, I'll leave it at that for now. Uh, So there are attachment is absolutely a species universal. I feel like we can say that all children and all cultures attach, and that is for good reason, because the baby just absolutely needs that to survive. However, absolutely sort of subtle but interesting differences across cultures in terms of how that presents. Um, yeah, so I'll let you go through this part in the book. I think it's pretty clear. Um, there have been lots of different. Okay, I'm going to stop there and record a third video, a last video.